Okay, so, you guys have sent in some really interesting stuff for us to look into this time. And, I think this time it's all about housing.
Yeah.
Um, and all the things that might be coming to kind of shake things up when it comes to, buying or selling or building a home or even just like the cost of, doing renovations and stuff like that.
Yeah. This is something that affects you, whether you are a homeowner or not. Like if you're renting, you're going to see the cost of renting going up, if you're a homeowner. Obviously, home values are tied to the cost of construction as well. So, this affects us all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that's so fascinating about this particular set of, sources and everything that you guys sent in is that it kind of brings together two really big areas that, people are talking about a lot right now, which is, immigration policy and, global trade and things like tariffs.
Right.
So it's like, how do these two things kind of play into the cost of housing? And it's so fascinating. So we've got this transcript here from a Saks Realty YouTube video, and it's called Housing Market Prepares for Higher Costs from Tariffs and Mass Deportation.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, they're not really mincing words, right? They're just kind of coming right out and saying, like, hey, there's some big changes coming, and this is how it could potentially affect the cost of housing.
Yeah. The title is definitely attention grabbing.
It is, yeah, it is. It's definitely attention grabbing. And you know what I really appreciate about the way that they approach it in the video is that, they kind of break it down into two really key areas. And that's what we're going to do in this deep dive is we're going to look at, what could happen to labor costs and how that could affect housing if we see some of these, immigration policy changes come to fruition. And then also what happens to materials.
Yeah.
If we see, trade wars and tariffs and things like that. So let's start with labor, because I think that's the thing that people are talking about the most right now. It's just like, is there going to be enough people to actually like build houses and do renovations if certain immigration policies are implemented?
Right. And this is something the video does a really good job of diving into.
Yeah.
They cite a Wall Street Journal article, and I believe this is from December 3rd. And it points out that in states like Texas,
Oh, wow.
California, New Jersey,
Yeah.
and even D.C., immigrants make up more than half of the construction trade workers.
Wow. That's huge.
That's a big number.
That's a lot. Yeah.
I mean, that just shows you how reliant the construction industry is on immigrant labor.
Yeah. It's not even just a little bit. It's like more than half.
Right.
It's pretty significant. And the video also brings up some research from Raywin Frost at the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies.
Oh, yeah.
And they're kind of echoing this point about the, reliance on immigrant labor in these, key areas.
Yeah, and I think what's also interesting is this video points out a Pew Research Center estimate that suggests undocumented workers alone make up something like 13% of the construction industry nationwide.
13%. Just undocumented.
Yes, undocumented workers. And that's more than double their share in the overall U.S. workforce.
Yeah, so basically what they're saying is that, if you take away that 13%, you're taking away more than double the amount of people that they represent in other industries.
Exactly.
That's a huge chunk of the workforce.
Right.
And I think that, this is where the argument from the construction industry comes in, and they've been saying this for a long time, is that, a lot of Americans just don't want these jobs.
Right.
And, they don't have the skills or, they might not be willing to work for the wages that are being offered.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point. The video even mentioned some figures from ZipRecruiter. I think about $25 an hour nationally, and about $24 in Maryland.
Okay, so, it sounds like decent money, right?
Yeah.
$25 an hour.
Yeah, on the surface it does, but
the thing that they bring up in the video that I think is so important is like, okay, $25 an hour nationally, but then if you think about like where are these big construction projects happening? They're happening in major metropolitan areas.
Yep.
Where the cost of living is so high that $25 an hour doesn't really go that far.
Right.
If you're trying to live in New York or San Francisco or even, D.C., where we're talking about, $25 an hour, then that might not even be enough to cover your rent.
And that's if you're living by yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Right. It's like $25 an hour doesn't really get you that much in some of these places.
No. And, that brings up that question, like if a large portion of that workforce is no longer available due to, potential mass deportations, what's that going to do to the cost of construction?
It's like is anybody going to be able to afford to build anything or get anything renovated? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a really valid question. And I think that, the article that they bring up from Pew Research Org is really interesting, too, because it's kind of like trying to get at the public perception of this issue. And it's from October 21st, and it's called "Most U.S. Voters Say Immigrants, No Matter Their Legal Status, Mostly Take Jobs Citizens Don't Want."
Yeah.
So it's like, are they right? Are these construction industry folks right when they say like Americans just don't want these jobs?
And it seems like the public perception, at least according to this article, is that they are.
That they are, yeah. So it's like if we take away this workforce, who's going to fill that gap?
Right.
And I think that the data that they bring in from the Census Bureau is really interesting, too, because it's like, okay, so let's just look at the numbers, what percentage of immigrant workers are in these different industries.
Yeah, and they pull this analysis from 2022. And, the one that stood out to me was agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting
Oh, wow.
at 27%,
That's huge.
with construction right behind it at 26%.
26, that's a quarter
Right.
of the workforce.
So we're not talking about, small numbers here.
Yeah, these are big numbers, and it kind of like, I don't know, for me it just like reinforces that point that they're making in the video, which is that this is a pretty integral part of the workforce.
Right.
And then they even break it down further into specific occupations.
Right.
They're looking at the unauthorized immigrant workers in 2022.
Right. And, some of these jobs, drywall and ceiling tile installers, roofers, painters.
Yeah, agricultural workers.
It's like, the people that are literally building the houses.
Right.
The ground level work.
Construction laborers, maids, and housekeeping cleaners.
So it's like, it's not just construction. It's like other industries, too, that are, reliant on this workforce.
Right.
And the percentages are, they range from like a quarter to a third of those workforce.
Like, that's a huge percent. It is. It's a big number. And it kind of like makes me wonder, like, okay, so if we take all these people away, are we really prepared as consumers to pay a lot more for these services?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? Like,
Yeah.
Are we going to see, a surge in DIY projects if hiring a contractor becomes like crazy expensive?
That's a good point.
Right.
Or are we going to see, like, I don't know, maybe like a bigger push to encourage, younger generations to go into these trades?
Right. And then maybe we see, wages go up significantly in these fields,
Mhm.
which could make them more attractive.
Right. It's like it could actually be a good thing for the people who are doing the work.
Potentially.
Yeah, but but then is it going to make housing, astronomically expensive?
Right. Exactly. So there's these trade-offs that, we have to consider.
Yeah, there's definitely trade-offs. And I think, what the video does really well is it kind of lays out both sides of the argument. And then it's like, okay, now it's up to you to decide, like, what do you think is going to happen and what are you going to do about it?
Right.
But then they shift gears a little bit and they start talking about materials.
Right.
Which I think is the other really big piece of this puzzle. Like, okay, so if labor is potentially going to get more expensive, what about all the stuff that you need to actually build a house?
Yeah, because, I mean, labor is one thing, but if the cost of lumber goes through the roof,
Literally,
literally, right, then you're talking about a significant increase in the overall cost of housing.
Absolutely. And this is where the whole like tariff conversation comes in, because they bring up President-elect Trump's stated potential tariffs, which are 25% on goods from Canada and Mexico.
Wow.
And 10% on goods from China.
That's huge.
That's a lot. And these are like our major trading partners,
right?
For building materials. Like, this is where we get a lot of our stuff.
Yeah.
And they bring up a Wall Street Journal article from November 27th, and it's called "Lumber Prices Unmoved by Trump's Canada Tariff Threat."
Mm.
But it's like, okay, so even though there was this kind of initial like, oh, maybe it's not going to be a big deal, the article also acknowledges that, like, if these tariffs actually go into effect, it's very likely that prices are going to go up for U.S. buyers.
Yeah.
And this is on top of, the fact that we're already dealing with affordability
Right.
issues. So it's like another layer of potential, cost increases.
Absolutely. And, to kind of emphasize that point, they bring in an article from February from construction.com, and it's titled, "Buy America. Provisions Can Improve Construction Lead Times for a Price."
Oh, interesting.
So, they're already acknowledging there that if you want to buy American in, you're going to have to pay a premium.
Right. So it's like, okay, so buy American, but be prepared to pay more.
Exactly.
And what's really interesting is that the article estimates that about a third of the materials used in U.S. construction projects are actually made overseas.
A third.
A third. It's not like a little bit.
No, it's not insignificant.
It's a lot. And then they go on to list some of these key materials that we get from, other countries. Cement, lumber, steel insulation, electrical equipment.
Yeah, it's like the essential ingredients for a house.
Yeah. It's like you can't really build a house without these things.
Right.
And then they kind of go on this really interesting argument about like bringing manufacturing back to the U.S.
Yeah, it's a whole reshoring argument.
Yeah, and they're kind of like, looking back at this time when the U.S. was this huge manufacturing powerhouse, especially like before the 1980s. And it's like that we're this pride associated with, made in the USA.
Right. Like it meant something.
It meant something. Yeah. And they connect this to like the millions of manufacturing jobs that have been lost since the 1970s.
Right. All those jobs that went overseas.
Yeah. And they're saying that that's a big part of the reason why we've seen like, stagnant wage growth and why so many Americans are struggling financially.
And they cite some statistics from rehorno.org. They estimate that somewhere between 3 and 5 million manufacturing jobs have been lost to offshoring since 1979.
That's a lot of jobs.
That's a huge number.
Yeah.
And they say that potentially a similar number of jobs could be created through reshoring efforts.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then, to kind of back that up, they bring in data from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, which confirms that manufacturing employment has seen a pretty steep decline over the past 40 years or so.
Yeah, because we've kind of shifted to more of a service-based economy, right?
Right.
It's like we're not really making things as much anymore.
And they point to a specific data point from the BLS. They say that manufacturing employment peaked at 19.6 million in June of 1979.
1979.
Yeah, but then by June of 2019, it had fallen to 12.8 million.
So that's a loss of what, like almost 7 million jobs?
Yeah, 6.7 million jobs, which is about a 35% decrease.
So it's like basically what they're saying is that we've lost more than a third of our manufacturing jobs?
In that time period, yeah.
That's a huge shift.
It's a massive shift. And, the speaker in the video really emphasizes the connection between that decline in domestic manufacturing and the kind of overall economic well-being of the middle class and the lower class.
Yeah, it's like if you don't have those good paying manufacturing jobs, then what happens to everybody else?
Right.
And one thing that they bring up that I thought was really interesting is that after each of the 5 recessions since 1979,
Oh, wow.
manufacturing employment never fully recovered to its pre-recession levels.
So it's like a downward trend.
It's like a downward trend. It's not like it goes down and then comes back up. It's like it goes down and then kind of stays down.
Right.
And I think that the main point that they're trying to make here is that, understanding this historical context is really important for understanding, where we are today and what the potential, solutions might be.
Yeah, because, you can't just ignore the past.
Yeah, you can't just ignore the past. And then they kind of bring it back to their own personal experience, as a real estate broker.
35 years in the industry.
35 years.
Wow.
They've seen a lot of changes.
Yeah. And they're talking about, all the challenges that they see on a daily basis, like high housing costs, increasing insurance and property taxes, and, those rising building material prices that we've been talking about.
Right.
And they even tell this really interesting story about seeing this, outdated, overpriced $500,000 home.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're paying $500,000 for this house that's not even that great. And it's like, this is the reality that we're living in right now.
Yeah, it's tough.
It is tough. And it kind of makes me think about like, all the people who are trying to, buy their first home, or even just, trying to make ends meet. And it's like, how are we supposed to make this work? Yeah, that's a really good question. And, speaking of the financial aspects of housing, we want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Flowers and Associates Property Rentals.
Yes.
Specializing in special needs housing.
Absolutely.
Robert Flowers, the founder of Flowers and Associates, is also a well-respected author in the field of real estate investing, with books like From Setback to Comeback, Finding Your Resiliency in Tough Times, available now on Amazon.
So, if you're looking for property rentals that really understand diverse needs, or if you're just interested in, Robert Flowers' insights on real estate investing, you can reach Flowers and Associates at 901-445-8148 or visit flowersandassociatesbooking.com.
Yeah, so, we've talked about these two major potential cost increases, the labor side of things and then the materials. And it's clear from the Saks Realty video that, these are significant challenges that the housing market is facing.
Yeah, and it's like, what's so interesting about it is that it's not just one thing. It's like all of these things kind of coming together at the same time.
It's a perfect storm.
And it's kind of like a perfect
Uh-huh.
storm. And it's like, how are we going to weather this storm?
Right.
And just to be clear, like all the information that we've talked about today comes directly from, the source material that you guys sent in.
Right. We're just trying to distill it down.
Yeah, we're just trying to distill it down and make sense of it and, hopefully give you guys some food for thought.
Right.
But, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the question that I'm left with is like, okay, so given all of these potential pressures on the housing market, rising labor costs, rising material costs, like what are the solutions?
What are the innovative solutions or policy changes that could help to ensure that, affordable and quality housing remains accessible for everybody?
It's a big question.
It is a huge question, and there's no easy answers.
No, there's no easy answers. But I think it's a conversation that we need to be having.
Absolutely.
And, I'm really curious to hear what you guys think.
Yeah. Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. And, let's keep this conversation going.
And thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
See you next time.
Bye.